Hi, everybody. This is Wendy, and this is Let's Talk About Love While We're Healing. So, in my first or second video, I talked about something that I have decided that I'm finally going to bring up out of the depths of me and heal and work on, and that I would someday share that story. And, well, I'm ready. I'm going to share that story today. So, I think I also mentioned in another video what that was, and that there was a suicide in my home. And so let's go through the story together. This is a big one that I finally also talked to my therapist that I've been seeing for a couple of years now, that I needed her help to deal with this. And she said, "You never even brought it up before." I had no idea. And I said, "Because I don't talk about it. I don't, some people know, or some people know that there was just a situation that happened in my life, but, no details or anything like that." Um, so here, right in front of everybody, and my therapist doesn't even know yet, I'm going to share that story. So when, um, when I was in high school, I had this best friend, and we started getting immersed into this circle of friends and really cool people. I miss them. I don't think I really talk to any of them anymore. We just kind of all dissolved, probably not long after my boyfriend's suicide. So, um, in that group of friends, I had met this guy, and I was in beauty school actually at the time. So we were already graduated. I still had the same best friend, and I was in beauty school, and me and him started a relationship. So I was 18, maybe. Um, and right around that time, I had already lost my 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 first love and best friend was murdered. So this is pretty much around the same time that I had met this person. So we get into a relationship, but just something always kind of felt a little off. Something felt, I don't know, something scared me about him a little bit. So I did end the relationship, and I guess it really broke his heart. Um, but we stayed amazing friends for years and years and years. I had made a lot of moves. My life was changing. I was working in a very successful salon. Um, life was just going amazing. And we stayed really, really close, really great friends. And at some point, he needed a place to stay. And I always took in my friends. I always helped everybody in every way possible that I could. That just felt like my mission on earth, was to help everybody. I used to actually say when I was a kid, when they asked me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I said, "I want to help people." And, well, everywhere I turn, I'm trying to do that in some way or another, just a little more carefully now. Um, so he moved in with me. I had owned my own house. Um, I was young, so we were in our 20s. I bought that house when I was 24. So I'm not quite sure what year he moved in or anything. And, great roommate, everything was going fine, and, we all used to drink a lot and everything like that. And, one thing led to another one night. Things happened. And next thing you know, we're back in a relationship. And, it was okay. Things were going okay. I still kind of had that weird nudge in my gut, that something wasn't right. And we're at a party at his cousin's house. I think it was his cousin. I went to so many parties back then, but an outdoor party. And this guy next to me is rolling a joint and putting some stuff in it. And I'm asking about it, and my boyfriend like runs across the yard, just books it across. Hey, she doesn't do that. And that's when I had found out that all these years that I spent with this group of friends, they were doing drugs that I wasn't familiar with. I was always the type to, I will try anything, but if I like it too much, I'm never going to do it again, you know. And yeah, that didn't ring true with this. Um, we started partying together, and our relationship kind of became toxic. Um, I I found that both of us, the only way we could actually communicate and lay our cards on the table and actually talk is if we were high, you know? And it became a daily thing. How they all could hide it from me all these years, I had no idea, you know? Um, but now I was one of them, and now we're all partying together. And it became very toxic between us. And at some point, I had to realize that this relationship was now too toxic as well. And I knew it would hurt him, but I had to break it off, and I was going to have to ask him to leave. So I was taking one of my best friends out for his birthday. I had gotten a limo and a bunch of friends together, and my boyfriend didn't like him, that friend, or really any of my friends. You know, he kind of competed with my friends. You know, he was a little possessive, and you know, I think competed, with my big social life. And I he had been out all day, and I didn't know how to communicate with him anymore. And I was a little scared of him, to tell you the truth. And so I had left him a note, and that's important because that actually was the wisest thing I could do. And that basically stated that I wanted to clean up and make my life healthier and just do better for myself, and that I needed to leave the situation. And I also needed him to move out. And, you know, I went out and we all partied that night for my friend's birthday. I had a great time. I came in, I put the receipt for the limo on the dining room table. The note was gone, so he read it. I didn't know if he was home or no. I think I knew he was home because his car was there. He didn't know I was home. He had came out as I had basically just come in and started putting things away. And, he's like, oh, I didn't know you were home. And he was kind of hiding his right arm, weirdly. And he went into the bathroom, and I'm hearing the water run, and I'm thinking he's brushing his teeth, and he's not. He's taking copious amounts of pills. And, he goes and sleeps in his room. I sleep in mine. We actually had separate rooms. Um, and, I wake up the next morning and I'm not thinking anything. I know that we're going to have to further discuss this. I figured maybe he was packing, while I was gone. I didn't know, or if he was going to pack that day or try and talk me into staying. I had no idea. And sometimes when we would get into an argument, if it was bad enough, if I decided to stay in bed all day, he would check on me like at 6 o'clock in the evening, to make sure I was okay, or vice versa. He had not come out of his room. I've not heard him come out to use the bathroom or anything like that. I'm in the living room, I'm watching TV, I'm just kind of going about my day. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'll run down to the street. A block away was the party store. I'll just get some chips and stuff like that and stay down there for a few minutes and see if maybe he's waiting for me to leave so he could pack his car and take off. And I'm waiting and I don't see him come out or anything. I buy some chips and whatever. I go back to the house, I sit on the couch, and I know something terribly is wrong, and I had that feeling, don't open the chips, don't even eat one chip because you're probably going to puke it up. So I get the nerve, it's about 6 o'clock in the evening, I get the nerve to go knock on the door and see what's going on, and I think I already know what I'm going to find by this point. And, no answer, no noise. And I open the door, and there he is. And so I, you know, it, it- you know, it, he was half dressed, and I've seen a lot of dead bodies. I've gone through a lot of loss by then, and at that young age. Um, including my first love and best friend when I was 18, and um, so I saw what the body does, when it deceases, and so there was no going up to him and trying to wake him up or anything like that. I knew he was gone. And I called 911, and thank God I had saved the receipt for the limo, and I had no idea what happened to the note. But, they came in, and of course they have to treat it. as possible foul play, possible murder, you know, and I'm freaking out. I'm, having to deal with what I just saw and everything that happened and absorbing everything that had happened before this situation. And, they have a chaplain there and he's talking to me on the porch. My sister had run over, my friend that I took out the night before had run over. And, the cops are searching my house and doing everything. I'm like, go do whatever you got to do. I'm watching them carry the body out, you know, and they decided that there was no foul play. They saw the limo receipt on the table. They found my note in his trash can, and they realized, yes, this was indeed a suicide. And, they had asked questions to my family and friend that was there. I think they had actually talked to his cousin on the phone, maybe before or after. It really, it's hard to remember all the details and in order because that day was such a whirlwind, and so there was no investigation. I didn't get hauled in and questioned and have to go through that process too, because I think that would have just been way too much for me. My dad and my friend that I took out the night before took me to the hospital. I needed some anxiety pills. My sister kicked me out of my own house for a week. I stayed with her. I have no idea who took care of my pets. Probably my friend at the time that I took out the night before. I don't remember a whole lot, being that young and never being on medication of any kind. The anxiety meds did their job, so, my memory's fuzzy, but then I moved back home, which surprised a lot of people. How can you live in that house after that happened? Well, I'd seen so much death already, nothing freaks me out, So, so I moved back home and tucked it all away, stuffed it down. I just got angry. I didn't heal. I didn't process it. I did the funeral. His mom did the funeral, but we all went to the funeral and stuff like that. And life just started changing for that whole group. And at some point we finally just kind of dispersed. But so that was the story that I told everybody that I would share someday, that that I just stuffed down and didn't heal or process or anything. And I sat on that anger all these years, 30 years. My God, it's been that long. And then I went through so much more loss, just continuous, all my friends. I have so many friends and just this huge social circle. So, there was just loss all across the board, and a lot of that I processed and stuff like that. I still hadn't healed from my mom, you know, I, I don't know. So, the moral of the story really is the importance of healing and healing your trauma and your experiences. Um, because that I consider that pretty heavy trauma. And it wasn't until about 5 years ago when I was in the depths of my physical disability and the amount of illness that I was suffering from. And as soon as one thing would seem to dissipate, another one would come in and maybe even more severe. It was like Spirit was telling me, you have to start um, healing. You know what I mean? Because your body, your spirit, everything will come in and show you what the consequences are for not doing that. You know what I mean? And that's when I started seeking professional help, a psychiatrist, a therapist, medication, and really working on myself, really working on my healing internally and emotionally and mentally and spiritually. And, I started healing physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I started healing and I'm still on that journey. It's not all over and I don't know how long it takes. But God, where I am today compared to just 2 years ago, 5 years ago, it's so important to heal your trauma. Oh God, I fell down the stairs, so I have like a big mark on my nose. Um, I didn't realize it then, but me not healing and stuffing all those emotions down and not processing my own emotions about everything that I experienced broke me physically and mentally. You know, your body will let you know that you've now consumed too much and you haven't done anything about it, and so everything starts failing. And, I think that's why I'm here living my life out loud right now, looking like a fucking idiot in front of everybody, is because I need people to understand how important it is to do your internal healing, to do your shadow work, um, to face your demons, You don't have to banish them. You become friends with them, name them, make them your footstool, you know? Um, it's so important because your body heals. I'm reverse aging, you know what I mean? Like, so many things are changing in my life for the better. I'm the happiest I've ever been. I'm getting the healthiest I've ever been, in all the ways I've mentioned. And discovering the self-love, like I said, I've always had self-respect. Um, I always had, the proper amount of ego, not too much, not too little. I had some really good things going for me, but when you discover that self-love and that desire to heal internally, everything externally starts healing. And your clarity, that your thinking, your mental clarity, and your self-value, and what you actually have to offer the world too, not just for yourself, but what you can give out because of it. And so, to the few out there that are actually paying attention to me, hopefully I can light a way on your path somehow. If you're feeling stuck, that we have to look inward. God, I'm shaking. um, we have to look inward and really start processing our emotions and healing, and it's not like bad things are never going to happen again. I'm still healing from just the most current situation that I just dealt with, but I'm doing it flawlessly. It's easy because I know how to process those emotions. I know how to heal from it and grow from it and move on from it. I'm no longer in a position where I can be stuck, because I'm responsible for that, nobody else, you know. And so, you know, um, I'm thinking faster than I can speak again. So, maybe I'll leave it right there. But, I finally wanted to share that story and how important doing your inner work is, for your physical being, for your whole world outside, for all your interactions, for everything you attract, the laws of attraction. And I'm going to leave it there. That's my story. Thank you to my subscribers. I looked recently and I'm getting subscribers. Like, and I don't know who you are. It doesn't show. I think most of them are private. And so, I'm assuming maybe I don't know a lot of you, but if I'm helping you at all, but while I'm trying to help myself, well, God, that's all I want this to do. This is kind of like my online diary, but with a purpose. There's a lot of people stuck out there right now, and they're maybe not sure what the first steps are. And if I can be a beacon of light, to just give you 3 steps forward, that's what this is all about. So, all right, before I start crying, I love everybody. This is Wendy. This is Let's Talk About Love While We're Healing.